Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Tech Talks, the virtual series designed to provide technical assistance to residents interested in learning more about Glynn County's Superfund sites. I'm your host, Rachel Thompson. A few housekeeping items before we begin. All microphones will stay muted until we reach the question and answer session at the end of the presentation. In the meantime, if you have a question, please enter it into the chat or the comment section on Facebook Live, and we will go through each of the questions during the Q&A session. Tech Talks are brought to you by the Glynn Environmental Coalition, a nonprofit environmental health and environmental justice advocacy organization. The Glynn Environmental Coalition was founded in 1990 by a group of concerned citizens who wanted to know how our community became so polluted, why we continued to have high levels of health-threatening pollution, and how an action plan could be developed to correct the problem. The fact that you're listening in today means that you share the concern and interest of our founding members, and we are extremely grateful for your participation. Today, the Glynn Environmental Coalition is presenting episode 5 in our series. In our earlier episodes, we discussed what a Superfund site is and how the law that governs Superfund sites came into existence. We have also covered the steps in the Superfund decision-making process and discussed past and ongoing work at the Hercules 009 landfill and LCP Chemicals Superfund Site. If you haven't seen them, be sure to visit our website, glynenvironmental.org/superfund, to listen and learn. Today, we will be talking about the Terry Creek Dredge spoils areas and Hercules Outfall Superfund Site, also known as the Terry Creek Superfund Site. During the cleanup process, a site can be divided into a number of distinct areas. These areas are called operable units and may address geographic areas of a site, specific site problems, or areas where specific action is required. You can find definitions for keywords like this and others by visiting the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency's Superfund glossary. The website is shown at the bottom of the screen. If there are any words you would like us to define or explain as we continue through the presentation, please let us know by entering questions in the chat or again, dropping a comment on Facebook Live. As I mentioned in today's episode, we're going to discuss the Terry Creek Superfund Site, operable unit 1, and we'll show you where that is in a picture in a minute. We will also, we will be discussing its location, sharing a brief history of industrial activities that polluted the area, and we will also provide an update on the historical and ongoing cleanup activities. To help us accomplish that, we have a special guest, Frank Anastasi, the Glynn Environmental Coalition's technical advisor. Since 1998, the Glynn Environmental Coalition has held U.S. Environmental Protection Agency technical assistance grants for the Terry Creek Superfund Site. This funding enables community groups like ours to hire our own technical advisor to interpret and explain technical reports, site conditions, and EPA's proposed actions. Frank has worked with the Glynn Environmental Coalition and the Brunswick community since 2018. And I'm now going to pass the virtual mic off to Frank so he can get us started.
Okay, well, thank you, Rachel, and thank you everyone for being here tonight. We're hoping that this will help you understand the situation at the outfall ditch area and the Superfund site in total, and see where we're going next. So with that, let's just move on, and I'll tell you that the Terry Creek Superfund Site is located just east of the Brunswick city limits at Highway 17. It's north of the tourist causeway, parkway there. The potential responsible party for this site is Hercules Chemical, and that means that EPA has Hercules Chemical Company legally bound to pay for cleanup of the site. Industrial wastewater was discharged from the former Hercules Chemical Plant located west of Highway 17 into the outfall ditch. And the ditch runs from the plant on the east side towards, on the west side of the highway towards the east under Highway 17. And then it empties into Dupree Creek, which flows into Terry Creek. Hercules produced other chemicals, but it focused on making toxaphene, a really potent pesticide, from 1948 to 1980. It ceased operations in 2009. Currently, the plant site's owned by Panova. Panova extracted chemicals from pine stumps for use in fragrances, to make chemicals for use in fragrances and consumer products. Panova discharged their non-contact cooling water and stormwater runoff into the ditch when it operated there, and that was from 2010 to 2023. And the plant closed in 23 after a fire that was pretty catastrophic. They closed down. The site is undergoing closure under the Georgia Environmental Protection Division program with oversight from them. And the plant site, that's the green blob on the left side of Highway 17, that's not part of the Superfund site. That's being managed under a different program. Whatever environmental clearances will be required there will be taken under the authority of the state of Georgia's Environmental Protection Division. So Hercules started discharging into the ditch around 1911, and from 1948 to 1972, what they dumped in there was untreated wastewater, and it contained a lot of toxaphene and other chemicals. That went into the ditch. From 72 until 80, they treated the wastewater somewhat, but still toxaphene containing wastewaters were discharged from the plant into the ditch and into the creeks. And as I said, Hercules ended chemical production in 2009 when they closed the plant. But the discharges that occurred for all this time contaminated the soil, the groundwater, the adjacent surface waters in the creeks, and the marshlands all around there with toxaphene and other contaminants. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers periodically dredges coastal areas, waterways and coastal areas like this, and they've dredged in this area, including Dupree Creek and Terry Creek. They placed the dredged sediment in several areas along the Dupree Creek and the Terry Creek areas, and these are called dredge spoils areas. So now there are these areas of concentrated contaminated sediments that the Army Corps removed from the waterways so the ships, barges, and things could get through. But now we have these deposits of dredge spoils, which are no doubt highly contaminated with toxaphene and other chemicals. And the problem with all of this contamination in this environment around Brunswick led the US EPA to propose the site to the Superfund program in 1997. Since then, EPA, GEC, the community, the state of Georgia, Hercules have been working through the process of evaluating the problem, trying to define it, trying to find out how to fix it, and moving forward. And as Rachel mentioned previously, this project's divided into separate units, the operable units, or the problem areas. And we're going to tell you mostly about cleaning up the ditch. But let's just recap on the previous cleanup activities. Between 99 and 2000, 35,000 cubic yards of contaminated sediment was removed from the outfall ditch area and portions of the creeks, Terry and Dupree Creek. Along the way, there was other work done. The wood storage yard where they used to store wood before they would process it, and the dredge spoils areas. There's been limited sampling in there. The upland area, this marsh wood storage yard, there's data on soil contamination there, and that area is subject to future possible residential development. So that's of interest. And there's contamination in the sediments, of course, in the creeks, and that's also going to be addressed in the future. So let's talk about the outfall ditch. Here's a nice aerial view of it. Just looking at it carefully, the shiny bright white stuff on the right, that's the new ditch construction area with piles of material and the actual ditch being constructed. The left side, that's a more natural looking environment. That's where that's the old ditch on the left side of that. There you go. That's the old ditch area as it appears, about a year ago, I think. So what was done here was creating a new concrete lined ditch, removal and offsite disposal of some of the contaminated soil and sediment that was still around the old ditch area, especially under the Highway 17 where there was a culvert that was going to be replaced. So that material was collected and contained. Backfilling and restoring the old ditch area is a major part of the project. And then developing a long-term monitoring plan to ensure that it's effective. There will be sampling water quality and sediment quality and looking at fish contaminant burdens over time. The idea was to reduce the loading of contamination into the creek areas. So the work started in the end of 2022, and they did remove this limited amounts of superficial soil. They excavated the new ditch area. They started building the new ditch and armoring it and protecting it so that it would stand up for a very long time into the future. And they were, there's a slight mistake on this slide. It's all my fault. Construction is not completed. It says completed the fall of 24, but the plot thickens around the end of 2024. Let's go to the next slide. So this shows the excavated new ditch on the left. The worker is probably raking out or maybe checking the depth of gravel that they placed. And then on the right side, you see they've installed what they call articulated concrete block. And these are like cinder blocks with holes in them, but they also have holes in it, so there's a channel. They string a heavy duty steel cable from the top down to the bottom all the way up the other side. That makes these blocks able to move a little bit, so they'll be able to flex with natural forces, and instead of being brittle and break under the stress of maybe a high flow event or an earthquake even, these things will move a little bit. So they're articulated, they can move like a bus. It's a double bus. It's an articulated bus that bends in the middle. That's what's going on here. So what they do is there's a geotextile fabric. You see what looks like a rolled up black rug that goes between the gravel layer and the block, and that adds stability and strength. And that helps maintain, again, the integrity of the new ditch over the long term. So maybe if we go to slide 11, there we go. Here's a close-up of these bricks on top of the geotextile fabric. And there's a lot of quality assurance, quality control that goes on when they put this stuff in. That's a survey instrument that's set up on the left on the tripod, and there are various air tools, air hoses and water hoses leading to the different equipment they're using. On the right side, this you see where a person that's properly protected and protective equipment is down. That's to the right side of that picture, beyond the buckets and under the ground there. Highway 17 runs over there. So this is a culvert that runs under Highway 17. So off to the right of this slide would be the plant, and to the left would be the ditch downstream towards the creeks. So this is an area where there had been contaminated sediment accumulated that was still there. So they removed that contaminated sediment, disposed it off-site in an appropriate manner. In January of 2024, they stopped backfilling this area. Here's the old creek on the right and the new ditch on the left. I mean, the old ditch on the right. So this shows what was going on at the very end of 2023. And they got to a point where you can see the backhoes in the right lower parts of the figure, and they were placing riprap, that's large pieces of rock, and they were placing sediment, soil that they had backfilled to place over the old ditch to fill in that old ditch. The idea is to fill it up to grade, cover it over, and restore it with vegetation and protection. But they experienced stability problems. When they would place the new backfill in, it would just slump and sink in, just like if you waded out into a really mucky marsh area. You know, you sink in. There's very low bearing strength soils, very fine particles. They're saturated with water. So whatever the testing that was done ahead of time to design this project, they missed something, and it turns out the subsurface isn't stable enough and strong enough to take the backfill the way they planned. So recently, after they saw we had this problem, they told EPA. So in January 2024, they stopped the project, and the contractors for Hercules came up with two options for finishing the backfill of the old ditch area. One was adding a geotextile fabric over the sediments, like you saw the black rug-looking material for the new creek, new ditch. They can lay that over, and that adds a strength so that they could continue to put the backfill material in and build things up to grade to restore it. And they would use this large stone pieces of riprap to armor the downstream end of the old ditch area where it hits the creek. And that was the plan. So the new plan was, well, we'll put in a geotextile fabric over this area to be able to help support the backfill. But a second option was, we need to add a sand layer on top of the geotextile fabric to make it even stronger, and to add more support for the higher levels of the backfill. And also, instead of putting the broken rock along the downstream edge of the old ditch area, driving a sheet of steel, sheet piling it's called. It's very common in construction. They would drive in corrugated steel sheet piling to make a wall, a tight wall that wouldn't allow water in the subsurface to go back in towards land and get back into the sediments and potentially make things unstable again. This would be a more expensive but a safer option for long-term stability. And so it turns out EPA, Hercules and their contractor recommended the lower cost option, but EPA compelled them to agree to do the higher cost, better for the long-term option, which includes the sheet pile wall, putting in a geotextile fabric, and putting a sand layer, and then backfilling to grade and restoring it. So EPA's approved that, and at this point, the contractors, we're not certain about this, but we think they're developing their plans to do this. We don't believe they've actually gotten that approved yet. We haven't been provided approved plans from EPA. So, but it won't take long, and they estimate like I think 4 to 6 months was the estimate of the time once they got approval to finish up backfilling the old channel and finish the project. But a neat part of this about this is you can see at the very at the upper left side, at the very upper end of the new ditch, you see the culvert holes there. That's where underground piping is going to take it all the way back to where there's a blue crane right in the middle. And around there is where the culvert comes under the highway. So that's going to be piped in. But the new ditch certainly looks better and rugged. And, I think they built quite a structure there. So let's see. So the project ought to be completed in 2025 if there's no other problems. And there shouldn't be really. So what's the current situation? In this case, on the left side, you can see what it looked like. And then on the right side, pretty much where they are as of when they stopped working in January of 2024. So that's the upper, they're defining this areas as the eastern end and the western end of the old ditch area. And then there's the new ditch that's nice and linear at the bottom. Where are we in the Superfund cleanup process on this project? Well, once the design is completed for this modified backfill of the old ditch area, that'll be, the design will be approved, and EPA will oversee that construction, and finally filling in the old ditch, regrading it, vegetating it, covering it up, and it should look very nice. And it should be secure. And that the backfill is to keep people from and animals from being able to get down and get into the subsurface, which still contains some residual low levels of toxaphene and other chemicals. And so once the work is completely done, there'll be long-term monitoring, and they will propose a long-term monitoring plan to look at water quality and sediment quality, and compare that with data on fish contaminant levels over time, to hopefully observe the result that this project was intended to provide, which is reducing the continued release of more and more toxaphene and other chemicals into the Dupree and Terry Creek waterways. What about the other parts of the site? The status of the other operable units, the other parts of the site. The soil at the wood storage yard has been sampled a few times recently. In 2020, they found some hot spots of toxaphene and dieldrin and chloridane. Those are other pesticides, and chromium, which is a common element of pesticides and herbicides. So they found some of them above EPA residential screening levels, and those are levels that EPA thinks are safe for people, for if you live there. They sampled more soil again in 2022 and 2023 to try to refine their understanding of where these hotspots were. And we don't really know what the results are. They haven't released them. They seem to be taking their time with this. And I guess it's driven by the need for the future use of the site. The property, if it's available and for sale, depending on whether it's going to be residential or commercial or industrial use, it probably wouldn't be industrial, but it could be commercial, like a shopping center or something. But depending on the use, the levels of cleanup would change. More strict cleanup for residential use. In the future, they'll look at this data, try to find out what's going on, and then they'll also be scoping out the rest of the site, the dredge spoil areas and the creeks. They need to be sampled, characterized. You need to understand the nature and extent of the contamination. That's the terminology in the Superfund program. That means, what contamination do you have? Where do you have it? How high levels of it are there? And so then once you define your problem, you go to the feasibility study stage. What can we do about it? So that's for the future here. The dredge spoil areas, the Terry and Dupree creeks, they're going to be studied in the future. We think that those scoping projects to start deciding where else do we need to sample, what other data do we need, what kind of potential cleanup options might there be, those decisions are going to be, those determinations are going to be addressed in the coming year, or probably a year or two. So after that, once EPA knows the extent of contamination in the dredge spoil areas and the Dupree Creek and Terry Creek areas, and given that there's a lot of residential use around those creeks, it'll be interesting to see what kind of a cleanup project will be proposed by the Hercules and EPA in the future. So then there's also fish sampling that goes on. Okay, sorry about this. We kind of covered this. That's where we are in these other parts of the site. We're just starting to study the sites, the dredge spoil areas, and the creeks. So the other element of this is fish. This is where the rubber hits the road, where people eat the fish. That's how you get exposed. One of the main ways you get exposed to the contaminations that are lingering in the community forever since the discharges were started back in the early 1900s. They've sampled fish and crabs, I believe, and other, well, here's the actual, all the species of, there's crab, there's shrimp, But they've sampled the fish over the years, and they have seen reductions in body burdens of the contamination, and that's led to changes in the restrictions on the fishing and eating. And those advisories are posted. The GEC has a big part of that. So that's about it. The site's moving along. There's this last bit of fine tuning of the design to allow backfilling and cleanup of, restoration of the old ditch area. But it looks like that's going to be solved, taken care of. And this part of the Terry Creek Superfund Site should be completed in 2025. And that's about it. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Frank. And take note of the contact information on the screen. And if you have questions, we hope that you will reach out to us and let us know and follow up with us later. Okay, so thank you again for joining us. If you want to learn more about Glynn County's Superfund sites or the Superfund process, as I mentioned earlier, don't forget to watch our other episodes on either our website. You can access them on our website, or we have a YouTube channel. You can subscribe and follow our YouTube channel. Thank you guys so much for joining us, and we hope you enjoy the remainder of your evening and have a great night.